This clip from the SVLG Cities Matter Summit is brought to you by Google.
Hi Alexa, as we just heard, you have a tremendous background in development in partnership with the community, driving change from the ground up. But before we get started, I want to say a big thanks to Google as one of the companies that supported Measure RR last year, which gave Caltrain its first independent, reliable source of funding, allowing it to provide more frequent service that is more equitable with reduced fares for many essential workers. Thank you for making time today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here and always glad to support transit.
We're thrilled to see years of work come to fruition with the announcement of the development agreement between the City of San Jose and Google for the project known as Downtown West. For those of you who have not seen the news, which is in every major Bay Area news outlet, Google's investing in San Jose at Diridon Station, building 7.3 million square feet of office space, creating thousands of high-quality jobs. And I understand that Google is committed to operating 100% carbon-free by 2030. And one of the most interesting parts to me is we're creating a transit-oriented green development here in the heart of Silicon Valley with 15 acres of open spaces. But I think what might be even more impressive than the result of that is how we got there in the development process in the community. Google's been far more engaged than developers who've been doing this for years. What was it like to collaborate with community on this effort, and how did that shape what's in the development agreement now?
I mean, it was pretty phenomenal. It's great to be part of an organization that doesn't think like a developer. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that Google approached this project the way it did because it is a learning organization. It's all about understanding people and figuring out ways to utilize the tools we have, the knowledge we have in order to accelerate that thinking. And that's exactly what this process was all about. So as somebody who comes from a development background, you can really feel that difference. It's sort of going from that process of really listening to hearing to then co-creating. And we really saw that in action here. So from our perspective as a team, we learned so much. And we had the trust and the collaboration of so many leaders in the community, especially within the equity community, that really rolled up their sleeves with us and made it happen with us. And it allowed us to get what I think is a really different type of community benefits plan that's sort of less about a moment in time and more about creating this foundation for where we can go from here. So it's really exciting.
Well, yeah, that's really great. And can you expand a little bit about like what you've learned specifically that the community taught you in this process?
Yeah, we often talk about, areas that need funding within housing, within job opportunities. We knew those two areas were pretty critical. And so we knew it was important physically. So originally the DSAP, which is the area-wide plan we're in, was primarily office. It was sort of the classic central financial district. And, we kind of moved that over to a social district to trying to figure out how can we create a place that's responsive to those regional needs for housing, that thinks about this as a city center that becomes the place to connect and be. And then on the public benefits side, we really learned so much about how funding streams work for communities and for organizations who are serving communities around education, job opportunities, and housing, and saw that there was a lot of separation between those funding streams. And there was communication gaps between even Google jobs and the types of jobs and the types of readiness programs that need to, and education programs to meet those jobs. And so we noticed that it was sort of a combination of the system itself was missing the interlinks between all of those people in order to have a cohesive system, because the person experiencing the impact receives that impact or experiences that impact holistically, but our solutions are fragmented. And so in learning that from the community, from various voices, from various organizations, the fund structure that we've created, that's the central part of our community benefits, seeks to bring all that together, and most importantly, to put the central decision makers of those who are experiencing the impact and those who are doing the work within the community, so that the infrastructure and the ecosystem around it, whether that be funding or transparency into those jobs programs, are all in service of that individual need and understanding it in a deeper level going forward. And so I think that fund structure of what you're seeing by a community and an impacts driven board and CAC that effectively votes on where the funding goes over time in a sustainable way through both stabilization and housing and job opportunities, with Google coming in as an ex officio member and same with the city, is this gesture to trying to figure out a different type of ecosystem approach in order to create the fundamentals that work in the future.
So let's talk about that. You're breaking down barriers to build more complete community. And a big piece of that's housing. We live in a part of California where even creating 100 new affordable homes can be big news. In this case, you're creating 4,000 homes, 1,000 of them affordable. That's 25%. But I think what makes this even more unusual is Google's proposed $200 million community benefits plan. I mean, you alluded a little bit to that. Can you talk more about how it came about and how you're looking for the implementation of it? I think you alluded to a community advisory council and some of that.
Yeah, I mean, the MOU, which was our memorandum of understanding with the city, with the community, early in the early days of the project, really set out the principles of not just thinking about one component of the project, but how to think about areas of the project where we called it sort of better together, where we as Google can benefit just as much as the community can benefit, and where we are really smart about replicable models such as district systems and the ability to implement microgrids where they're a benefit to us, they're a benefit to the environment. And that allowed us to really think about several different segments of how this project could be responsive. The first being climate action, climate change, thinking about how nature could even drive into our cities and into the densest part of our cities in a really meaningful way. All of those pieces, I think, are going to be increasingly important as we go forward. The second, as you mentioned, is how do you design inclusive communities? And a lot of that was around the creative use of the land, of how we think about the implementation of the fees that we, do already own, and how to realize that very, very locally. We always said we wouldn't take any subsidy for the project, so the infrastructure is borne by the project, as it appropriately should be. And so that allows us to give lots of positive local impact. That allowed for the space on the community benefits, the piece where we take how much increased zoning we have and say how much does that leave us to share in the community benefits, to really realize some ambitious goals around equity and racial equity and how we think about the growth of our communities and the city as a whole. And when I say we there, I don't by any means mean Google. I mean all the groups who have been both experiencing and working within that impact. And so that allowed us to do the co-creation process, which we talked about, which was to really bring everyone to the table and say, how do we do that? That's a complex problem that has been in the making for many, many centuries. And so how do we approach that in a way that's going to be sustainable, that's going to consistently learn and iterate from itself? And the fund structure felt like the real way to do that, and to see it grow, to see it be something that wasn't a Google fund, but was actually a fund about reimagining the future of San Jose, and that was owned and led by San Joseans, and that could be built upon, and maybe other funders come in and starts to become something that's replicable and highly responsive.
A lot of this isn't in traditional development playbook, a lot of improvisation. And it seems as a stakeholder in this community, you'd want to pass some of this along. So what are the lessons you've learned and how do you think they can model future development?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first lesson, which we've talked a lot about today, is just process, how important process is to set a foundation. And thinking in the long term, which is inevitable when you're kind of in that more owner user position, but you find all these and discover all these opportunities when you have that long term lens, which actually is really relevant in any development around, how might a user benefit from microgrids, and therefore how could you build a sustainable model that works financially and works to help further climate change goals. And so finding those win-wins through thinking through in the long term is really important. I think also thinking about place, not as your as a profit center, obviously, but increasingly as a place for social connection, social cohesion. which is very much means it has to be of its context, as we've talked about. We all don't really like as much going to, a generic mall, say, as we do liking going to a place where you're like, wow, this place has a ton of character. That doesn't happen unless you're really context driven and you invite people in and you co-create and you bring that program to the site. And so that'll just create enormous value in ways that aren't necessarily physical. And I mean, I'll end on the process one again, because I can't say it enough that if we can move from that state of, we started off with community meetings, great to listen. We started to hear by doing user research, great to kind of hear. But now we're really in a stage of, and I think this is so important societally as we think of economic recovery, how do we co-create? How do we figure out ways together? And I think that is, has such opportunity that we just scratched the surface on this project to really rebuild in a different type of way in cities.
And I think maybe one thing that is preface to your process is intentionality, right? And so really, collaboration and intention along with that process results in a broad benefit. And so I think that's really great. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. This would normally be done on a stage somewhere with a lapel mic that sometimes doesn't work. And now it's virtual and at a time of remote work. And you're building in downtown San Jose, the heart of a city, and not just a standard office park, but a next generation development, a transit-oriented development near Caltrain, light rail, buses, and in the future, BART and high-speed rail. So that really begs the question of our event. When so many are going remote, why does Google believe, in fact, that cities do matter in bringing people together?
I mean, there's so many reasons why this city and this site and cities matter. First and foremost, I don't think we're ever, and Google will say, we're never in a world where we're only remote working. We're in a world where it's a hybrid world, and we don't know exactly what that looks like today, but what we absolutely know is there are moments that it's essential to gather. And as you use the word of intentionality, our intention in those moments of gathering is very much around things like collaboration, refueling, making sure we're not, too heads down and we've sort of slipped into that moment of social isolation, but opening up to being able to connect on a broader level. And that helps our mind stay fresh. It helps our teams connect with one another. And it helps people just have that right balance in life overall, which makes them better at performance. And so, of course, we always still need our cities. And of course, a city like San Jose that's incredibly diverse and culturally rich is the exact type of place that we're going to want to be. And its proximity of the foundations and fundamentals of being around transit, of being part of a mixed use environment with nature around you, all of these things are going to be only more attractive as we look into the next generation of where we're going together.
Well, thank you, Alexa. I really couldn't have said it better myself. We're just really excited to see what comes next, and I look forward to speaking with you again about Downtown West.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for your time.